these people are not crucial constituency when it comes to climate change, when it comes to other aspects that are very, very crucial. The informality of Africa is important, and there can be no climate change response that will ignore the 80% of Africa's informal sector and will result in building resilience. That can happen. It therefore means that the 80% of Africa's working population engaged in the informal sector must become the bigger part of our strategy in any response when it comes to biosecurity, when it comes to climate change, because ignoring them will mean that we're actually ignoring the fabric that we need to strengthen. Tapping informal sector as critical stakeholders becomes very, very key in building biosafety measures, and therefore we must leverage on them. We've worked across the continent, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, in Zambia, and we're working, leveraging the informality of Africa, which has strength, the local governance structure. Africa is not a one data statistic point. I hear some people call Africa a country. Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent with over 1.3 billion citizens, with unique peculiarities, with local governance structures like cooperatives, like the governance structures of kingdoms that are quite very, very key. We've leveraged this, and we are actually decentralizing these environmental solutions that I mentioned here today from Cameroon, Uganda, Nigeria. We are developing nature-based input, biofertilizers, and leveraging the structures of cooperatives. It therefore means that biosafety efforts need to consider this dimension to complement One Health. And that takes me to the fourth point, to the fifth point. But before the fifth point, Africa is a youthful continent. You can only compete from a position of strength, and Africa's strength is her youth. But not just her youth by name, but her youth when they are given the requisite skills to be able to not only engage in devising this One Health solution, but to become part and parcel of the process. Their ingenuity, their creativity, their vibrancy, their passion cannot be ignored in the fight against making sure that we win with climate change, we win on the biosecurity front. And the last point, data for policy. Data is important. Data is the new currency of now. And targeted incentives are critical, but only critical when there is data to inform the gaps that we need. Targeted incentives are critical to addressing the bottlenecks and tapping to the pockets of success stories that do exist across our continent today. Working with young people, working with the informal sector, what we have seen is that the data, especially from solar dry, helping inform standards, can actually result to incentives to drive this transformational development. And leveraging our educational sector, like, for example, the data from solar drying in Nasarawa State here in Nigeria, that have helped inform the development of a climate entrepreneurship curriculum in Nasarawa State University. That's the way to go. And this is something that is quite very, very important. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, our collective capacity is greater than the magnitude of our challenges. And the problems, if we leverage them from the opportunity lens, will not only create opportunities, but it will empower our continent. Therefore, let's join hands and build this consortium of One Health, knowing fully well that there are no shortcuts to the top of the palm tree, because tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manang. That was very passionate. I like it when my speaker, presents not just the academic aspect of it, but the passion with which they deliver that. The fact that we are a youth-centric continent, not country. I wonder how anybody will think Africa is a country, but these things happen a lot of times. Interestingly enough, we have over 20 countries, as a matter of fact, represented here at the 8th edition of the African Conference on One Health and Biosecurity. And just like Dr. Dotun mentioned when I had him on show, that the youth itself, is because of that youth population, is part of what we need to focus in terms of our health strategy. And it's great to know that UNEP is playing a very key role in that regard. Thank you so very much for that presentation. One more time, we would like to quickly move on to our next item on our agenda, and that is going to be our first side event. And I'm very excited about this. My speaker is an individual and an expert who obviously has worked in the conventional arms branch of UNODA for over 10 years. He's also worked at the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations. As a matter of fact, since 2018, he had worked with his colleagues on the United Nations Secretary General's mechanism for investigation of alleged use of chemical and biological weapons, UNSGM, where he maintains and manages the roster of experts and laboratories nominated by states and coordinates organizations for training activities and more. He is a political affairs officer in the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, Weapons of Mass Destruction branch, and is going to be leading the presentation on United Nations Secretary General's mechanism, SGM, for investigation for alleged use of chemical and biological weapons. Please put your hands together for Mr. Hideki Matsuno. Please, the more you clap, the faster it comes. All right. You're welcome, sir. Next 20 minutes.
Good afternoon again. This is Hideki Matsuno from UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. I will try to go through my presentation very quickly. It will consist of two parts. The first part is my quick brief on the UNSGM, background, mandate, and then very briefly on training activities. The second part is a presentation by Dr. Lucille Bloomberg from South Africa, who should be connecting virtually and presenting a more detailed a brief on the UNSGM training activity that took place in South Africa this past June. So first slide, please. So in a very brief, what is the UNSGM? And first of all, it's the full title is UN Secretary General's Mechanism for Investigation of Alleged Use of Chemical and Biological Weapons. And so that, as the name suggests, it is SG's mechanism for investigating the alleged use of biological chemical weapons. And it is an impartial, science-based investigative mechanism of the UN Secretary General for the alleged use of chemical and biological weapons. It has its mandate from General Assembly in 1987, and in its resolution, operative paragraph 4 said that the member states request the UN Secretary General to carry out investigations in response to reports that may be brought to his attention by any member state concerning possible use of chemical, bacteriological, or toxin weapons that may constitute a violation of the Geneva Protocol or other relevant rules of customary international law, in order to ascertain the facts of the matter and to report promptly the results of the investigation to all member states. So it's a rather long quote, but I quote it in full because it packs all the necessary information and ingredients of the UNSGM. Better to refer to the previous slides, but it is the mechanism of the UN Secretary General first. And the second is that any UN member states can request investigation. So it's not just the members of Security Council, for instance, but any of the 193 UN member states that are part of the General Assembly can request. And it is the investigation of alleged use and not any other aspect of the biological or chemical weapons. For instance, production, transfer, all these other aspects are covered by other relevant international laws, such as BWC and CWC. But SGM only deals with investigation. So how the UNSGM works? first, a couple of things have to happen. UN member states first nominate experts and laboratories to the UNSGM roster. And UNODA, as the custodian of the SGM, maintains that UNSGM roster. In addition, member states cooperate with UNODA to provide training to the nominated experts. So these three things happen before the alleged incident took place. And once the incident involving biological weapons take place, what will happen next is that UN member states first request the UN Secretary General to conduct investigation into whether a biological weapon was used. And if the Secretary General decides that
Hello?
Hello, me. We would like you to use this, and then.
Oh, there is a teleprompter here as well, so I don't want to work with that.
All right.
Sorry about this. So where are we? Yes. So if UN Secretary General decides that investigation is indeed needed, he will activate the UNSGM, and then the experts and laboratories nominated to the UNSGM roster are called upon to be part of the mission or to support the mission. Then the UNSGM mission team is sent to the mission area to conduct an investigation to ascertain the facts of the matter. And based on the finding of the SGM mission, Secretary General reports the finding to the UN General Assembly. In terms of number of the roster that currently we have about 530 qualified experts. Qualified experts are the one who will be actually sent to the mission area to conduct investigation. For example, take sample, conduct interview, visit alleged site, write report, etc. We also have 59 expert consultants. The expert consultants play more of an advisory role in that they to advise Secretary General how to improve operational readiness of SGM and etc. We also have 88 analytical laboratories. Those laboratories will be asked to analyze samples taken from the field to see if there are any biological materials in it and report to the mission. You also see that these pie charts are color-coded. Green at the top is Africa, and as you can see, in each of the categories, the African countries are quite underrepresented. Anywhere between 1/8 for the qualified expert consultant only have one expert from Africa. We have about 7 laboratories from Africa, but considering the number of countries in Africa, it is quite low. So ODA has been conducting outreach activities to Africa as well as other regions such as Caribbean and Latin American countries, Asia and Pacific, to increase nomination of experts and laboratories from these areas. So this is just to recap what the UNSGM is. First, it is a tool at the disposal of the UN Secretary General in response to reports from member states. Secondly, it is mandated by the General Assembly, and its mandate was also confirmed by the Security Council. But this is more of a general assembly mechanism, and it is not, Security Council does not have much of a formal role in it. The UNSGM is also currently the only international mechanism to investigate the alleged use of biological weapons. For chemical weapons, there is an OPCW, which has quite a robust system of laboratories and so on. But for BWC, there is no equivalent organization. We have, of course, BWC ISU, but they are rather, they're quite different from OPCW. And lastly, UNSGM is an impartial, science-based international mechanism for investigation of alleged use of chemical and biological weapons. What UNSGM is not. UNSGM is not a standing investigative body in the sense that there is no UNSGM entity in New York or other place waiting for member states to request investigation. It is rather a roster that comprise experts and laboratories nominated by member states. They go through training from time to time, but otherwise, they do not exist as a standing body, waiting for investigation to take place. UNSGM is not linked to the Biological Weapons Convention, although BWC Review Conference and meeting of state parties have referred to the UNSGM in their outcome documents from time to time. But otherwise, there is no formal linkages between the two instruments. And lastly, UNSGM is not an early response or containment or preventative mechanism. It only concerns investigative activities and do not have a capacity or mandate to deal with other aspects of biological weapons issues. Quickly on training. The training is very important for UNSGM, and it is because the operating environment of UNSGM mission is, first of all, potentially hazardous. It might be used in the context of conflict. It will be under severe political scrutiny because any allegations involving the biological weapon use is going to be really a big one for any state. So any states being suspected of those weapons use would want to deny any such allegations. And lastly, UNSGM is composed of experts with diverse nationalities and expertise. So, in order to operate efficiently as a team in a potentially hazardous environment, the training becomes very important. And the aim is to acquire capabilities and skills needed for investigation, such as interviews, communication, safety and security. Most of our experts on the roster are scientists or laboratory technicians, and they might be experts or very well versed in their respective area, but they may not be familiar with these aspects that are integral to investigation. The training is also needed to ensure integrity and validity of investigative activities. For example, proper sampling, storage, transportation, and chain of custody. And lastly, training is also provided so that they can be familiar with the UN style of report writing, which is quite different from scientific writing that they may be accustomed to. UNODA has worked with member states since 2009 to provide training activities for experts, and here you will see a list. We have conducted about 20 or so training. Most of them are in Western Europe, Sweden, France, Denmark, Germany, UK. We also work with OPCW. Also, a couple of trainings were held in Australia. And in 2002, June this year, we had the first training outside Western Europe and Australia, and that was in South Africa. In terms of organizing training, ODA play a main role in terms of selecting participants, developing program, providing trainers. We also provide funds for the travel of participants. On the other hand, the member states hosting the training would provide venue and the trainers. And this is in cooperation, this could be discussed with ODA to what extent they will provide substantive training. And they may also be requested to provide equipment and materials needed for training. I'll skip this. The most recent training that we have had was in South Africa in June. This was a 2-week basic training course for mostly newly nominated experts. And it was hosted by South Africa, NICD, a National Institute for Communicable Diseases in Johannesburg. It was the first UNSGM training held in Africa, and also the first to be held outside Europe or Australia. The training program was co-developed by ODA and South Africa. And the ODA gave some lectures, and we also selected participants and provided flight ticket and DSA, among other things. But it was really a joint endeavor between UNODA and South Africa. And here, if Dr. Lucille Bloomberg is connected, I would like to give floor to her to give more detail on the training we had in South Africa. And I don't know if it's possible to switch to virtual.
Those of us on Zoom can hear you, though.
Dr. Lucille Bloomberg from South Africa.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, there she is. So I don't know if you have seen my presentation, but I gave overview on SGM and then very briefly on training activities and South Africa training.
Yeah.
So if
So
you could
I
continue
did
with your...
hear, yeah, if you can just. No, the screen sharing is disabled. Maybe I'll just talk to it. So the training was 2 weeks. It was it required quite a lot of preparation. It was quite a lot of hard work, but it was an excellent experience. And I would encourage Nigeria to possibly set up a similar training. I think what was really important was that 7 of the experts and 41% of the trainees were from the African region. And this really is an attempt to improve regional representation in the roster and the number of trained experts. I think Hideki has outlined the basics and the components of the training, some theoretical, some laboratory, some very practical, learning about PPE, personal protection, about sampling, about planning a mission, about working as a team, and about gathering evidence. There were many sessions that demonstrated all the requirements that one would use on a mission: how to interview, how to sample, how to write the report, how to follow the requirements for a mission. Um, the, um, the most exciting part was the field exercise. The NICD has a beautiful campus. I think Professor Tamori, who's on, has been there. So it lends itself beautifully to a field exercise without having to go anywhere. We had very limited resources, so we used what we had, and we used our own staff as actors in the scenario. We set up a scenario very much based on previous ones to really ensure that people had practical experience of what a mission would be, and it would satisfy all the requirements for a mission, but all kind of just in one day, given some of the time constraints um, and some of the practicalities. But I think they learnt a lot. They learned where some of the gaps are. They learned how to work as a team, and they certainly learned how to gather the evidence quite quickly. So the exercise revolved around um, a breakaway area from a state that was accusing um, the parent state of having intentionally released a bioweapon. So we chose anthrax because it's endemic in the area, and many times these exercises have the problem of trying to separate what is endemic and what be naturally occurring versus intentional release. There were many false leads, there were many scenarios that were there to confuse people, but I think the teams did a fantastic job. It was very much a One Health exercise, and I think people really, um, let me see if I can show you some pictures. There we go. There's, there's the group, um, and there's Matilda, the sheep, who obviously had anthrax. On the left side, you can see some of the exercises, the lectures, um, the laboratory work, the sampling in the field, and then some work around sampling Matilda. Um, Part of the exercise is to include communications, and on the right side, you see one of our staff who is acting out the role of a reporter. She really did a great job trying to get information. And one of the areas of training is, just be wary of the media and how to avoid them and how to be nice to them. But she published a publication afterwards that tells you everything. So that's a little bit about the background um, into the scenario. You can see some of the crops. You can see the farmer who had an anthrax lesion. You can see poor Matilda who died in the field. And on the left, we used a sort of natural crop as part of the indicator that perhaps the state that was accusing the other was perhaps producing their own organisms. So it makes for good reading, and there's a lovely newsletter put out by UNODA that I think is worth looking at. So they learned how to do PP in the field. You can see some of the scenes from our institute. It's really almost like a big farm. You can see poor Matilda who's vomited some blood, and then you can see the use of PPE, the interviews, and some of the work in the field. We also had patients that got interviewed. We had an epidemiologist. We had lab visits, and I think in one day they did a fantastic job. They couldn't conclude whether it was an intentional release or an accidental release. There were a lot of things going on that were not quite above board, but I can tell you that Matilda survived and will be available for the next exercise, but we renamed her. So really a great experience, and I really would encourage you to set up one of these field trainings. I think it's very worthwhile for the country and really creates capacity for security. Thank you. So that's my story.
Yep. Thank you, Lucille. And yes, I received the presentation PowerPoint file from Lucille and forwarded to Dr. Ayodotun, but I think we didn't have enough time to put it on our screen. But we have the files, so I think those can be circulated to participants, I think, as part of the package. And it has all the nice pictures from the exercise, including the PPE and also the sheep, the poor sheep that was infected with anthrax. So what I wanted to stress with this brief session is that we want to get more nominations from member states for experts and laboratories, and also hosting of training by African states. That would be highly appreciated. South Africa did great training, and I think we want to see more of this training in Africa and other regions of the world that are underrepresented. And if you have any questions, let us know. I'll be here at the conference for the next 3 days. Also, you can reach me, and you can also send email to unsgm.un.org or go to UNSGM website that's listed on that screen, where you can see all the information. Yes, I think
Thank you. Your phone is important. Please make sure you hold on to your phones and your personal belongings. We don't have any CCTV camera in the hall here. Thank you so very much. That has been the presentation from UNODA. Quickly, I'm going to announce my next speaker, who, as a matter of fact, has authored several papers on bioterrorism, laboratory biosecurity, and bioethics, as well as delivered at several conferences in Latin America on different topics related to non-proliferation of biological weapons. She is a member of the Committee on Biosafety and Biosecurity at the Microbiology Argentinian Association, and since 2018, she has been a member of the group of experts that assist the committee established pursuant to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 5040. She was vice chairperson of the Advisory Board on Education and Outreach at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, and through which she had her own training. She's a doctor of veterinary medicine and holds a PhD in toxicology, and she's from Argentina, I believe. Please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Dr. Edith Valles, as she comes to make the presentation by expert group of the 1540 Committee, Strategic Importance of UNSCR Rule 1540 in Mitigating Biological Threats in Africa. You're welcome. You can use that.
Thank you. Just leave me this. Thank you so much for your words, and I'll try to be quick because I know that everybody must be hungry, right? Okay, good. First of all, I would like to thank the GET Consortium, to Dr. Babadoya Yodutun for inviting the committee to participate in this really very important event. It's an honor for me to be here, and this is my second GET meeting because my first one was in 2018 in Sierra Leone, and I really enjoyed it very much, and I think that this meeting is going to be even better. So let's start with the presentation. In this slide, you can see that biological risk can be considered as part of a spectrum, since they are related to a broad number of possible scenarios that can be classified into three main categories: natural occurring events, unintended ones, and deliberate risks. As you know, prevention and management of these risks require, among other measures, the implementation of national and international dedicated biosecurity measures and standards. And I'll focus my talk on the intentional area of the spectrum on the right-hand side, for which implementation of Resolution 1540 plays a crucial role. What is Resolution 1540? It's a United Nations resolution adopted by the then 15 members of the Security Council and was unanimously approved on 28 April 2024. This resolution was implemented since the international community was concerned about the fact that weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery could fall into non-state actors' hands, including terrorists. The triggers for the adoption of this resolution were the existence of a broad international network of non-state actors whose objective was to supply nuclear weapons to different states, and the attacks perpetrated in US in 2001. Resolution 1540 complements relevant multilateral treaties and arrangements, including, for example, the Biological Weapons Convention, and imposes binding obligations on all states to adopt legislation to prevent the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and their means of delivery, and establish appropriate domestic controls over related materials to prevent their illicit trafficking. The 1540 Committee is a Security Council's subsidiary body established pursuant to this resolution, to the Resolution 1540, that monitors and facilitates states' progress toward full implementation of the resolution. This resolution was reaffirmed by follow-up ones, including the most recent one, the 2622, which prolonged the mandate of the resolution and the 1540 Committee till 30 November 2022. The committee is nowadays conducting a comprehensive review of the resolution's mandate and is now drafting a report which will constitute the basis for the subsequent resolution. Why is Resolution 1540 mandatory for all UN member states? Because it imposes binding obligations on all states under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, irrespective of their status regarding the treaties and multilateral agreements that already exist. This means that states cannot allege that, for example, they don't need to implement the resolution since it is a state party to a particular convention. But getting deeper into this subject, I would like first to define three basic concepts that are already defined by the resolution, because we are going to use these concepts along the presentation. The very first definition is on means of delivery. That means that includes missiles, rockets, and other unmanned systems capable of delivering nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons that are specially designed for such use. The second definition is related to non-state actors. The fact that Resolution 1540 refers to non-state actors is fundamental because till 2004, no treaty or convention linked weapon of mass destruction and non-state actors. In this regard, the resolution defines them as individual or entities not acting under the lawful authority of any state in conducting activities which come within the scope of this resolution. Usually people tend to think that when we talk about non-state actors, we basically talk about terrorists. And that is not the fact, that is not the case, because anybody who is not under the lawful authority of a state is a non-state actor. And finally, related materials are defined as materials, equipment, and technology covered by different multilateral treaties and arrangements or included on national control lists, which could be used for the design, development, production, or use of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons under means of delivery. When we refer to biological related materials, we are talking about biological agents, equipment, and technology necessary to design, develop, produce, or use biological weapons. You need to consider that these materials, equipment, and technology can be used, for example, like in this graphic, to produce a bioinsecticide, but at the same time, they could be used to produce a weapon, and this is why these are called dual-use materials. Resolution 1540 establishes in its three first operative paragraphs the obligations to be accomplished by member states. The first operative paragraph determines that all states must refrain from providing any form of support to non-state actors that attempt to develop, acquire, manufacture, possess, transport, transfer, or use